Hey everyone, and welcome to the Bridge to the Bay with Dr. Veras. I'm Dr. Matt Veras, and this is episode 2 with Dr. Brian Feng. Brian is one of my new colleagues at Calico, and he's actually a more recent hire than I am. But in our first few meetings, I found that his background was incredibly captivating, and so I asked him if he'd be willing to have a conversation about it. So this is that conversation, and unfortunately, this is still early on in the podcast. So we're going through some technical challenges, and we actually lost the first half of this conversation. So it's a little shorter than we would have hoped, and we perhaps rushed through a couple of things, but we can always revisit later. But I thought it was a really captivating conversation, talking about Brian's journey into industry and where he's been along the way before coming to Calico. We talk about his experience at Novartis, a major pharmaceutical company, and then his transition into the Alphabet family of companies, Google X, which is a moonshot company doing really cool things. And finally, why he chose to come to Calico. So here, we discuss the life of a scientist in industry and a little bit about life in the Bay Area. So, if that sounds of interest, have fun listening along. If not, hopefully one of the future episodes is of interest. Welcome back, Brian. We both kind of overlooked it. This is one of the earlier podcasts here. So we missed a little material in where you were talking about where you grew up, where you did your undergrad, and starting grad school. So maybe if you could just run through that quickly. You grew up in St. Louis, right?
Yeah.
Maybe just say where you grew up, what school you went to, what lab you went to for a Ph.D., and then we can sort of get into the fun stuff, which is where you're at now.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and I was a diligent student in my early training. Was exposed to science early through my father, who was a scientist at Monsanto for his career. Just retired last year, and
congrats.
Yeah, he's thoroughly enjoying retirement.
That's good. Now's a good time to be retired.
Yeah, he stays inside all the time. So I when I went to college, I had an inclination that I wanted to do science, but not a real strong commitment at that point. But the turning point for me was doing some undergraduate research. I did some undergraduate research at WashU and at University of Texas, which is where I was doing my degree. Mm-hmm. I was excited enough by that I decided to do a PhD, and I was looking around for PhD programs, and I was lucky enough to be admitted to Northwestern University, and I've worked in Brian Schoikit's lab, mm-hmm. who was one of the early proponents of docking, or computationally simulating enzyme inhibitor interactions, mm-hmm. and was very quickly pivoted through the subtle guidance of Brian to move into a wet lab project where I was studying biochemical assays and enzyme inhibition in a kind of promiscuous mode where it was causing problems, which was an area that was of great interest at the time to pharmaceutical industry, and I started getting exposed at that point through my project to a lot of pharmaceutical drug discovery, which is at that point I became very convinced that was what I wanted to do in my career.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And we were saying earlier that you were in a program at UCSF. What was the department of pharmaceutical chemistry?
Yeah, so the funny story was that I joined Northwestern, but my first year, Brian elected to move the lab to UCSF.
Right.
And that came as a total shock. But
a welcome shock, though.
It was a welcome shock. Yeah, I was cold because it was October and it was my first Chicago winter. But I elected to go with him, and rapidly fell in love with San Francisco and the Bay Area once I got out here. So at UCSF, where we ended up, I joined the chemistry and chemical biology program, and Brian's lab was in the among other departments. He was in the Department of Pharmaceutical Chemistry, and so that chemistry, as we were talking about a little bit, was particularly strong and well connected with the Bay Area drug discovery and biotech kind of industries.
Right. Yeah. And I was saying that where I'm coming from in Canada, they kind of pushed out the pharma companies back, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah. Merck Frost.
Sorry?
Merck Frost, which is...
Merck Frost?
Merck had a site called Frost, which...
Because it was in Canada?
I don't know. No, I think it had 2 S's. I don't know. It was a proper noun, I think. And I don't know. It just sounded like the coolest name for a company location ever. I don't know. But yeah. It felt like all of those sites kind of closed up.
Yeah. It was kind of before I was old enough to be aware that was happening. I believe the prime minister, so that'd be equivalent to governor, or not the prime minister, premier, be equivalent to governor at the time, was Brian Mulroney. And I believe it was something to do with tax incentives. So they were heavily taxing pharma companies or something to that effect, at which point it became untenable to manufacture there or even hold headquarters. So
yeah,
I think most of them have an office there, which is essentially used as like a consulting hub. And when they roll out the product in Canada, they'll have a couple of people that manage its release or distribution. But really, there's no access there. There's not pharma companies looking at the grad programs. There's not grad programs looking to interface with pharma.
Yeah.
So we really don't have that connection. And it's more like we're just dreaming about it. Like maybe one day we'll do something and someone will find it important or interesting.
It's just, it's amazing to have the local resources in a place like San Francisco or San Diego or Cambridge, where there's just so many companies and alumni of programs just still hanging around.
Yeah, it's wild. The concentration is just unparalleled. Yeah. Okay, so you came over to UCSF or to SF, and you said it was kind of a place you really enjoyed and fell in love with.
Yeah.
Are there particular aspects of Bay Area lifestyle that really connect with you?
You know, I think at the time it was 2003 when I got out here, and the Bay Area was just recovering from the first tech recession at that point. The boom and bust
bubble.
Yeah, there's probably been more than that, for people that have lived out here for a long time. but it was definitely pretty recession-y when we arrived. And San Francisco, it definitely had a very welcoming, anything goes, like whatever whatever your thing is, like that's cool, man. There were as opposed to now, it's been a big change, because at that point there were a lot of artists around, and like to be a graduate student in San Francisco at that point, you're equivalent to a starving artist.
Right. Yeah.
So we were all just kind of making do with our modest cash reserves, and you go to the bars where they would have like $2 pints, and you meet all kinds of people on a Tuesday or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a bit different now, but that was the vibe that San Francisco had. It was just very, very like open-minded, and that was kind of what I think I needed as a person at that point, was just to be in a kind of environment like that.
Yeah, that sounds like a great place to sort of expand your mind, look forward, and see what the possibilities are. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's different. Like, have you noticed a difference in like the San Francisco culture recently?
Yeah, the artist community, I think, has been pushed out. Yeah, it doesn't quite have the same chill vibe that it used to. I don't know how to quantify that. there's no data I have to support that claim, but
right. But yeah, it's not really a thing to be quantified. It's a qualitative feel, right? But people notice that. I think that's a consensus in the area. I think a lot of people have blamed that on tech coming in. Some people have blamed it on the NIMBYs not allowing housing to be built. It's a combination, in addition to California moving in the direction that it's going.
Yep.
It's tough to live out here. It's really expensive still. There's a huge discount for the pandemic. So when I moved in, I got to move in downtown, which was kind of nice.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how long that'll last, but just even coming to my building here, everyone's sort of my age, like millennial. I think pretty much most people here are programmers. But they're all saying like, this is a great city. This is probably the best part of town if you're our age or whatever. And it's great. Everyone's friendly. Always places to hang out, people to talk to. But I haven't seen any of it because I moved during a pandemic.
Yeah.
So it's been all masks all day.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see, even if it's the diluted San Francisco culture, to see what that's about.
Yeah, and with rents coming down, I think the hope is that it'll chill back out a little bit again, and maybe relax back towards the vibe it had at other times. We'll see.
Yeah.
I think the cool thing about the Bay Area now, I mean, tech gets a lot of play, and that's deserved. But the other thing that I think that's changed is that the biotech companies have become sufficiently concentrated at this point that it itself is like it has momentum now. Whereas back in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was still a relatively small number of companies that were really out there doing stuff. Like Genentech was still, on its initial kind of like ascent into the stratosphere.
Yeah.
And it hadn't quite gotten to be the massive behemoth it is now. So it was early days back then too. So, but now it's cool because you meet a lot more scientists than I remember meeting back in the day, just out and about, like in the neighborhood, walking the dog around my neighborhood. There's a pretty good chance you're bumping to another scientist.
Are you close to South San Francisco then, over there?
So I'm in the southeast corner of San Francisco.
Okay.
So kind of over towards the new Warriors Stadium.
Yeah.
And so like with our neighborhood, it's so close to the highway that anybody that works in South City or points beyond, like this is a great like jumping off point for getting down there. Caltrain is down here, so it does, I think, pull a lot of people that have Peninsula, South San Francisco commutes, which tends to select for people in our line of work.
Yeah, for sure. It's crazy. Like, what's the number? Like 20 or 30,000 scientists working at the biotechs in South San Francisco there?
Oh my God, I hadn't even tried to imagine what the number is like. That's
someone told it to me when I came here. It must have been maybe someone at HR at Calico or something like that, but maybe even cab driver. I don't know. Someone was saying it, and it's growing. It's at least 20,000. It might be 20,000 just at Genentech.
Yeah,
like 30,000 in the city, looking to grow. I think another 20,000 in the next 5 or 10 years or something like that.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it does seem like it's growing.
It's a lot more vibrant now. It's just biology and science is permeating through the culture. Maybe picking up a little bit of the slack that the arts kind of left behind. So
yeah, well, I'm glad it's growing here, and it can benefit from the tech industry. Like they work in great harmony, and there's plenty of companies leveraging it, just like Calico is. So once you're wrapping up your PhD, you said you pretty much figured you'd want to go do a postdoc because the job market was a little quiet, and you wanted to do a postdoc so you could gain another skill.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I was looking for, I did my postdoc search looking for labs that had a really strong interest in cell-based assays, cell-based kind of screens. And so I ended up looking at a lot of labs kind of in the Stuart Schreiber ecosystem. There was a lot of chemical biology and interest in cellular screening from people in his orbit. So at that point, I actually considered moving out to the Boston area to go look at some labs out there, and I interviewed some places, but ultimately I was just kind of like, kind of like it in the Bay.
Right.
Why pick up and go somewhere completely new? I felt like if I hung out here, I'd be able to continue to work on the relationships and the doing the interacting with the kinds of people that I'd started interacting with in graduate school, and that would be useful for when I wanted to look for jobs eventually. So I ended up going to a lab at Stanford, and I joined the lab, the lab of James Chen in the chemical and systems biology department. Mm-hmm. And I had that was another department that had a lot of people that were just really interested in drug discovery or inhibitor discovery. I was working on, my project was a siRNA screen looking for novel modulators of the hedgehog signaling pathway.
Okay.
So
cool.
So that was my strategy for getting the cell assay kind of experience.
Yeah. Well, sounds like a sound strategy and one that seems to have worked out, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I was particularly successful as a postdoc, but but I did get the educational component that I was after.
Mm-hmm. When you say not as successful, do you mean like sort of in comparison to how you performed during your PhD?
Yeah.
What impact that was?
Yeah,
it wasn't a commensurate jump.
My PhD project was particularly fruitful. I think I published several kind of short papers from that work, and it was like the projects just kind of came together. It was really nice. Then when I got to Stanford, it was more of a slog. We were doing a screen, and so whenever your project is a screen, you don't know exactly what you're going to get out the other end. And then there weren't kind of intermediate successes that could either become their own short little papers or signal that you were on your way to something better. Right. And so it was just kind of one long campaign to get to some things that looked good and then try to figure out how they worked. And it didn't end up feeling like a compelling scientific story to me.
Yeah. Well, I think that's more normal than your PhD experience.
Yeah, I think so. Unfortunately.
Yeah. But you say it was a long time. Was this was it 3 years, 4 years? Or
started in 2007, and I was looking for jobs 2011. I started my job in 2011. So it was about 4 years. 4.5.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is, I think, pretty normal for a biology postdoc.
Yeah, it's pretty normal. I mean, I know a lot of people that have done, their first postdocs 3-4 years, another one that's 2-3 years on top of that, or 2 that are maybe more equal in length. But yeah, pretty much all the people I've heard of that have gotten a faculty position are at least 5 years postdocing.
Yeah.
And 2 postdocs. Yeah. It's a lot. When I was thinking about that, it was a lot to be staring at. And I already felt like I had sort of mortgaged my good years to get the PhD in and of itself. And I'm looking around at a bunch of people that are like, yeah, man, you only got another 5, 6 to go
Yeah.
before you can start a normal job, like not be treated like an unofficial adult, not a real adult.
Yeah.
It's even postdocs, they're not paid like you should be as a doctor, right? It's kind of cheap labor at that point. So I was lucky that I could just go straight to industry. I think like James, who hired me, James Lee, was saying that he was hoping to get someone with a PhD, but that everyone that was applying had a master's or an undergrad, because it wasn't a postdoctoral position.
Mm-hmm.
So he wasn't getting people with a doctorate. And he interviewed a couple, and they said they were uneasy because they weren't sure if they could make it back to academia after.
Yeah.
And that is just really strange to me, because I always felt like if I was going to go to industry, I could probably leverage that as a bonus to get back into academia, because how many people have come to academia from industry? But also, like, I didn't really hear any good stories of kids going to to get a job in academia. It's just unheard of around me. The first example I heard of got hired a year ago, and she was a postdoc when I was starting my PhD.
Okay.
So I think she did like 6 years of postdoc, something like that, and like really, really high caliber. So I was hearing from a bunch of people, oh, just continue to do a postdoc and eventually you'll find something. And these sorts of tones I hate, because a bunch of like uncertainty, but not just that, it's not planning, I guess, not having a game plan.
Yeah.
And I'm just not that kind of a person. I tend to think of, shoot for a grandiose goal. You might not get it, but you're at least moving in a good direction. So that didn't really spook me in coming here at all. And mostly what I was actually looking for, I applied to some postdocs too. I only heard back from one, and the other one was at Novartis in San Diego.
Uh-huh.
The academic ones just didn't respond.
That's interesting.
They didn't even say like, sorry, we're not going to consider you, or we considered you and you're not good enough. Just nothing. Crickets. And it's really strange. There's some big labs. Maybe that's why. But it seems a little weird that, that was the stage where I have a PhD, going to a postdoc. I had a pretty good PhD from what it seemed like. I would expect to at least hear back from a couple. So that was a little strange.
Did your advisor also contact those people?
No. So this was completely independent from my supervisor, because what I was trying to go into, she had no experience. And that was understood. And that was part of why I stayed at where I was at Western. It was that it's a smaller school, but I knew the project I was going to work on. And I had been in the lab as an undergrad, so I kind of saw the trajectory and knew it would be a good project. But mostly it was an opportunity for me to get access to big data sets, which is what I wanted. And I felt like I could step right into it, as opposed to having to start something new in a fast-paced environment where perhaps I'd lose out on some learning. Some practical knowledge. So instead, I kind of did it all myself and learned a lot, but it was challenging. And I couldn't quite get that quality that I was hoping for, because it was mostly me doing it. And so the main thing I was looking for was some machine learning engineers, because we just don't have them. If we do, they're in Toronto.
Yeah.
And even those don't really, work in biology. They're kind of, there's a lot of AI going on over there. As well. And so I was looking for just either universities or labs that had done some machine learning on big data. And there's some, but then didn't really have postdocs looking for the skill set that I had. They mostly want people that are programmers or something like that. And I didn't have quite a good enough skill set in that area. But Calico, I knew the company was structured in a particular way.
Yeah.
And that was that there's a lot of computer scientists, machine learning engineers, especially, that work in concert with the biologists. They're generating the big data. And so everyone can work together on it. But the infrastructure's there, and there's the experts there that could do it better than I can. So,
I mean, for that kind of interest, I think you ended up at a pretty good spot.
Right. And honestly, Brian, it was mostly me dreaming up a position, and then I went to see if it was out there, and Calico kind of showed up. There was a position that I actually qualified for. I was surprised about that. I applied for it like the next day. This was all like after the winter break. So it was like, it's a new year. I'm going to try and get a job. That's what I'm going to try and do. Put an application. I got an email back that day to do a phone screen. And I think a week later, I was on the phone with James. A week after that, I did a talk. And then 2 weeks after that, they flew me down to do an in-person interview.
Right place, right time, right person.
Maybe 2 weeks right after. So it was all very quick in succession. And I only heard back from the other position, Novartis, but when I was waiting to hear of an offer from Calico. So just how quickly, it was James specifically, but how quickly Calico moved was a big positive as well. All the signs were pointing towards a company that was like thinking in the way I thought, moving in the direction I thought, thinking big, high impact for the future, and on the biggest problem I can think of in biology, which is how do we keep living?
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Another fortuitous story. That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thanks. But this is about you. So once you wrapped up your postdoc, were you going straight for industry? Were you seeing what was available?
Yeah.
Casting a wide net? Or?
Yeah, it's interesting because while I was a postdoc, and working on my my signal transduction project, I didn't have quite as many touch points into industry as I did while I was in graduate school, and so
okay.
What I did instead, I have to put in a plug for a program down at Stanford that was run out of the chemical and systems biology department, but it was called Spark, and it is a program that is designed to facilitate discoveries that happen at Stanford and translate them into small companies.
Oh, okay.
Wow. And I think I had continued to nurture my interest in working in industry and biotech while I was at Stanford by building a relationship with people in those programs, and that was a really critical part of my postdoc education process. Mm-hmm. And seeing a lot of the kind of topics that I was interested in about how to discover drugs, how to turn them, from early hits into commercial products. Mm-hmm. That was something that really kept the kind of fire going for my desire to end up in industry. So yeah, when I was starting to wrap up, I was really keen to just hop out into the job market and start seeing what was out there in terms of startup jobs and jobs at bigger industry companies like Genentech and other things in the area.
Yeah. And so where'd you end up going?
So I was on the market for about 6 months. I was looking, and I had a bunch of interviews that didn't really go anywhere. And I interviewed for a job at Novartis in the oncology group, which at that point mm-hmm. was in Emeryville. Okay. And it was the former site of a startup, a pretty well-known startup called Chiron. And Novartis had acquired them in the early 2000s and built a research site up in Emeryville. And it was a group mostly focused on oncology at that point. And I went out there and I interviewed for a job in the genetics group, even though I'm not a geneticist. And I didn't get the job, but I heard that through the grapevine of people that hadn't offered me jobs, that there was a new group moving to the site, and that was an infectious disease group.
Okay.
And so that group was moving from Cambridge out to Emeryville, and they were going to be hiring people to do everything. There was all of the jobs being open, but I was particularly focused on small molecule screening and assay development kind of roles. And the job I ended up finding there was in the antibiotics discovery group.
Ah, okay.
So I unexpectedly made a shift from eukaryotic biology to prokaryotic biology.
Yeah.
But I ended up in the kind of job that I was kind of hoping for, even going back to my early graduate school kind of pipe dreams.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's great. So how long did you stay there? And, what was the main takeaway? Was it what you were expecting? You eventually moved on, so.
Yeah. So I was we were all there together for about seven years. Because I was one of the first new hires that didn't move from Cambridge, and that was 2011. Mm-hmm. And the layoff announcement came in July 2018, and then I think my last day was September 2018, and it was a really good run. It was a good job. That was a solid place to work, especially coming out of training. Yeah. It was a department that was a really nice mix of young, inspired go-getter types that were coming out of training, and vets that had been around the block several times.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's key to wrangle those wily young kids, right?
Yeah. So, it was just a really good group of scientists, and I had a lot of opportunities to develop skills, teamwork skills, like soft skills, how to play nicely with other kids, and not run with scissors in the lab, I guess. I don't know. It was just a really very warm, nurturing environment for a young scientist to develop.
That's good. And so, in the end, why did you move on? Was it the team just was dismantling, or you were looking for something?
Yeah, the whole department got shut down.
Oh, okay.
They laid off the bacteriology and virology groups in 2018 for a corporate restructuring, and everybody kind of disseminated into the Bay Area drug discovery ecosystem very efficiently. It was and we had there were definitely positive aspects to getting laid off, which I was not expecting. So
how so?
Well, when I was young, my dad, he was working at Monsanto, and every year around Christmas he would get stressed out because the corporate restructurings would come around, and so I always had this very visceral fear of being laid off. Everybody there did, because you're a small satellite site of a giant pharmaceutical corporation. Like, these things happen.
For sure. Yeah.
So the announcement, they did it in a very, I don't know how much of this was out of the goodness of their hearts or what, but they told us in July, and we had multiple months to basically wrap up what we were doing and look for jobs. So I was paid full time to write up papers and look for jobs and network.
Wow.
And then I finished when I finished, I had another month or so where I was just finishing up my job hunt. By then, I had kind of several options that looked viable, and I was exploring them. And I just, I was fun employed for a little while. It was okay. There was a severance package. It was not the end of the world. It was not as terrifying as I was thinking it was going to be.
Huh. That's interesting. Yeah, I think I never heard a story of someone getting laid off at a big company like that, I guess, and staying afloat. But like, I think this is a good area for that sort of dynamic because, like, I was at a venture capital meeting in Toronto at one point, and there was a guy telling me that there's almost no venture capitalists in Canada, and that's because there's no venture capitalists in Canada, so they don't have partners to work with. There's no ecosystem.
Yeah.
That if someone doesn't have the expertise, they can be like, actually, my buddy at this company can help you better, and we'll co-opt on the deal or something. And he was saying this in contrast to Boston, where you get fired or your startup could fail, and you get a job the next week and not even have to change parking spots, was how he said it.
Yeah.
There's just such a concentration of talent all working on similar things that the overlap is all there. So you lose one opportunity, there's already a bunch there.
Yeah.
You don't even have to move. So it creates an environment where people are allowed to risk take and they're allowed to fail. Whereas, places where there isn't that concentration can't.
Yeah.
So in Canada, it's not a thing. But that's also why Silicon Valley works so well with tech. And I'm glad to see it's expanding in biotech as well.
Yeah.
I think someone told me that it has the largest concentration now of biotechs, which I thought was interesting. That it's now past Cambridge.
Yeah, I find that interesting.
Or I guess
as well.
Boston. Maybe it's a concentration thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's all Oyster Point.
I think like the Boston, New Jersey area definitely has the concentration of pharmaceutical research. So when these corporate restructurings happen there, I definitely heard from friends out there that, yeah, you just kind of roll across the street and you see who will let you come back in. But it's true. Like now San Francisco and the Bay Area is like that. I mean, between the job that I worked at after Novartis and coming to Calico, I have moved, I think, maybe a half a mile. My commute is exactly the same.
That's great. So are you allowed to say where you went after Novartis?
Yeah.
How you got to Calico?
So when I finished after Novartis, I was feeling kind of open-minded and curious because I'd spent 7 years doing small molecule screening and drug discovery, and through my time at Novartis, I'd gotten introduced into some of the more modern, recent innovations in computational approaches to studying data. And so I was particularly interested by an opportunity at an Alphabet-associated company called X, which is used to be known as Google X, and it's a bit of an incubator that Alphabet maintains to kind of execute on very ambitious long-term research projects.
Right, and some of those have been rolled out to other Alphabet companies now,
yes,
right?
Yes. The aspiration of all the projects at X is to become their own letter of the alphabet, so to speak, and become a self.
I thought that's a really cool idea. Yeah.
And in the news, I just read in the news this week that one of them that I was particularly fond of, Loon, which was the internet delivery by stratospheric weather balloon company, is rolling. They're shutting down, which is kind of a bummer. But
damn. Yeah.
That's how it goes. But X was really cool. Is a really wild and zany place to work. And it was my first exposure to Alphabet and Google and things that there were definitely things to enjoy about the kind of cultural heritage that Alphabet associated companies have.
Yeah. Like, first day of work, what did you notice was different from Novartis, or what was the biggest difference?
Oh, okay, yeah. So at Novartis, your first day, you rolled in, you met with maybe an HR person, you did a bunch of trainings.
Yeah.
And you kind of go to your office, your desk, and you get a computer, and you kind of poke around at it for the rest of the afternoon. Meet some people. Yeah. You talk to HR 3-4 times about trying to get things set up and make sure you're in the system. Maybe do some more trainings. That all happened within about the first hour of being at Google. So like, X does its orientation in line with Google. So I went down to Mountain View to the main Googleplex for orientation, and there was like 200 people there.
Oh, okay.
And you walk into the room, you go to your, there's like a station to take your picture. There's not even like some person with a camera. It's just you stand in front of a thing.
All automated.
Picture, and then you get your badge later. I don't even know how the automation on that works. But you walk into this giant room full of 200 people. They're all, for the most part, they were working at Google or, more kind of main trunk Google companies. And you sit down at a chair. Somebody tells you to go sit down at a chair, and you sit down. And your computer is there, and it's got everything installed on it, and all your information is like largely pre-populated into the databases. And then they're like, okay, we're just gonna all together set up your benefits right now, and then everybody just goes through it in 20 minutes. Everything is set up, and then they give you a little hat with a beanie on it.
Now you're a Googler or Noogler.
Yeah, a Noogler, and it was just like the efficiency was orders of magnitude different than at Novartis. It was pretty wild. Yeah, that was fun.
So did that efficiency carry through with other aspects of Google X?
Yeah, video conferencing was pretty top notch. Trying to coordinate like research across multiple sites at Novartis was always an adventure. This was the age of pre-Zoom age, and so it was always one video conferencing platform trying to talk to another video conferencing platform, and maybe 30% of the people in the room really were comfortable setting it up from scratch. There were always, 20-minute delays where you couldn't get the slides to show up, so on and so forth. But like at X, all of the VC stuff was already integrated, like it is now, But just walking into a conference room and you sit down, and then all of a sudden the other person's face is in front of you, and you're already
going.
Yeah. So the technology was clearly deployed in a much more sophisticated, aggressive fashion at Google than at Novartis, as you would hope.
Yeah, it's almost like they're a tech company.
Yeah, it's like they're a tech company.
All right. Well, okay. So you weren't there too long then, right? We were in beginning of 2021. So
yeah.
Is that light dying on you?
Yeah, it's trying to, but it comes back on.
Yeah, there's a charger there.
Yeah, I got it plugged in.
Okay.
I think. Anyway, yeah. So the way that projects work at X is that they're essentially startups, and so the project that I joined was maybe 20 people, 15 I think when I joined it, and it was its own thing at that point, and the project was, as 20-person startups are, the project developed very quickly in unpredictable ways and pivoted and, very dynamic. And at some point, it had drifted a little bit further from drug discovery and the kinds of issues, like the kinds of scientific topics that I was really interested in. And I was just starting to feel like time might be right for me to go back towards drug discovery again. And so naturally I looked within the Alphabet ecosystem and Calico was I already knew from some interactions that Calico was filled with some pretty like-minded individuals in terms of bringing together technology and biology, and so that was it felt like a pretty natural transition.
Nice. So you're just making this transition now. When did you get hired officially?
My first day was in October 19th.
October, yeah. So you're even newer than I am.
Yep.
Well, that's great. I mean, it'll be nice when you can meet your coworkers in person, right?
Yeah, indeed.
Have you been able to sort of get the ball rolling on anything that you were hoping for?
Yeah.
Some in silico stuff, maybe?
The people that preceded me kind of did all the proof of concept work on the technology that I'm going to be using a lot. And they did such a good job that everybody at the company was pretty much beating down my virtual door to talk to me about new projects that they had dreamed up. It was, I think, the nicest way to onboard at a new company possible is just to have a bunch of people excited to work with you. So it was, it's been pretty fun.
That's good, Ryan. I hope it galvanizes into some solid projects over the next couple of years here.
Yeah, it's looking like it. I'm excited.
Good. Well, I think now is a good natural stopping point. We went over what I promised you with a little technical difficulties, but it really was a pleasure to talk with you, Brian, and thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
Absolutely. It was fun.
I hope we can meet in person. I can say this again. Maybe grab you a beer at some point.
Yeah.
But for now, it was great meeting you over this and learning a little bit more about you. And I think I'll let you go.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. This has been Bridge to the Bay with Dr. Veras, with more to come.